Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen wa sallallahu wa sallam ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Amma ba'da, habati fillah, assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. أسأل الله كريم رب العرش العظيم أن يتولنا في الدنيا والآخرة. We ask that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Almighty, accepts our good and forgives our evil, protects us from kulli su' wa makruh, blesses us with ikhlas, with the bad, and puts this on our scale of good deeds, not our scale of bad deeds. A question was asked: as a 21-year-old man interested in developing a Muslim neighborhood with a masjid in the United States, I hear some scholars emphasize the obligation to migrate to a Muslim country if one has the financial means, and to not live permanently in any non-Muslim country unless it's for da'wah. So in the context of real estate development, what are the conditions in accordance with Islam for such a project? Would providing housing for the Muslims in a non-Muslim country be considered harmful if it delays or even prevents them from making Hijrah? And how can I ensure my project aligns with Islam and serves the community in a permissible way? These are excellent questions, especially from such a young man. That this shows maturity, it shows insight, it shows foresight, and it shows, a type of a level of maturity and concern for one's deen. So may Allah bless us and bless you, forgive us and forgive you, guide us and guide you to the sawab. So as you mentioned, in developing a Muslim neighborhood with a masjid in the United States. So the reality is, most of the people cannot make Hijrah. Most of the people will not make Hijrah. Those are probably two realities that we do need to kind of conceive of, wrap our heads around as Muslim minorities and as Muslims in general. And I don't mean to discourage, this is what I firmly believe. I believe this. I believe most people do not and will not make Hijrah unless they are really forced to. Secondly, the second issue is and when I mean even the capability, that's beautiful for those who can, and that's beautiful for those who truly want to. This is a beautiful thing, and it makes the for all the Sharia-based reasons. For example, making the Ummah united and together. That you are living with the Muslims, strengthening the land of the Muslims, and so on and so forth. Many Sharia-based reasons. Also, Hijrah is an excellent form of ibadah. It's one of the greatest forms of ibadah, and the Prophet ﷺ mentioned it in the hadith, which many of the muhaddithin began their books with, and that's the hadith of Umar radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, who said, Abu Hafs, Umar ibn al-Khattab radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, قال سمعت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يقول, that Umar radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, he heard the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam saying, إنما أعمال بالنيات وإنما لكل امرئ ما نوى فمن كانت هجرته إلى الله ورسوله فهجرته إلى الله ورسوله. He heard the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam saying, verily actions are tied to the intentions, and everyone shall get that for which he intended. Therefore, he who migrates for Allah and His Messenger, then he is migrated for Allah and His Messenger. And he who migrates for to take some woman in marriage or for some worldly gain, he will get that for which he migrated for. And this is in Bukhari and Muslim. This beautiful hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam shows us the importance of the intention. Making your intention, whatever act of ibadah that you do, that your intention is for Allah and that you're worshiping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone. And this hadith also illustrates the fadl, the excellence of making Hijrah. And Hijrah is of different types. There's Hijrah, as the Prophet ﷺ mentioned, that is one of the types of Hijrah that is one of the greatest types of Hijrah, and that's leaving off sins. That means you are leaving sins to go to obedience to Allah. So if you were into pornography and you were into smoking weed and different things, you left that and you come to obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is one of the greatest types of Hijrah. Also, the second type of Hijrah, which is mentioned in the books of fiqh and so forth, is the Hijrah to Allah and His Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, meaning to the land of the Muslims where you can practice your Islam. And the Hijrah has different stations, if you will. That there's Hijrah from the land of Bid'ah to the land of Sunnah. There's Hijrah from the land of Shirk to the land of Tawheed, or the land of Iman. There's Hijrah from the land of, and mostly it's used as Hijrah from, the land of disbelief to the land of belief. And so this is azim, this is great, this is beautiful. And I ascribe to the view, and I believe this is the most correct view, or I wouldn't ascribe to it, and it's what the Hayat Kibar Ulama mentioned in Saudi Arabia, and many scholars before. These are very long discussions, knowledge-based discussions about making Hijrah from a non-Muslim land. What is the hukum? What is the ruling? Because that's a whole nother issue. What is actually the ruling? Is it an obligation, or is it something which is recommended? Now, that is going to depend on the place that you reside. So if you live in a place which is harmful to Islam, meaning you cannot practice your Islam, maybe there's no Jumu'ah, there's no Salat, you can't make Salat, the state will kill you, whatever, they'll shave your beard, they'll do this. There are those types of, especially in the past, those communist regimes, and even those socialist Baathists that tried to melt in with Islam. For example, Bashar al-Assad in Syria and his father and others prior to them, who were basically Arab nationalists and socialists and so forth. But yet they still somewhat would attribute themselves to Islam, some of them. So under those regimes, it was extremely restrictive and you couldn't practice Islam in some of those circumstances. So for the people, maybe under those circumstances, it would become an obligation. So the hukum changes. Likewise, for people who live, we have a variety of circumstances. The United States, as the questioner mentioned, is quite different than France, and it's quite different than the UK, and it's quite different than Germany, and it's quite different than Belgium as far as practicing your Islam. Especially Belgium and France, is those countries, because of their ethics of the country and their political culture, it is based on assimilation. They really want to make you little Frenchmen, and they want to make you little Belgian people or whatever. And probably also places like Sweden to a greater lesser extent, that there's a lot of pressure to kind of more assimilate. In other states like that, Denmark and so forth. And so with that being the case, each place is different. So depending on, and as the questioner mentioned, they mentioned America, that I believe that as many of the major scholars mention, they give us those qiyud, those conditions that, hey, if you can practice your Islam, obviously you can't practice perfect everything, but you can practice. We have freedom in America, probably unlike any other country in the world, period. So we're able to practice a lot of our Islam, and we can have the signs of Islam. Even some places you actually make the adhan outside, like maybe in Philly and some of the big cities. So with that being the case, we have the ability to practice our Islam. So under those circumstances, it becomes mustahab, recommended, that you make hijrah from that land. So getting to your question, you said you want to build, you want to do a real estate project and so forth. Ala kulli hal, this is something which is very good. And because, as I said, most of the people are not willing to, and probably I would say a majority of the people, they could not go necessarily to the Muslim lands. As many Muslims as we have in America, I don't think the gates are going to be open for those who are non-professional, those are this. But that doesn't mean, if you have the intention and you strive, Allah may open that up for you. So we don't discourage anyone, but we also deal with what is the sunnah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what we see from experience and what we see in the world, that there's a bit of impracticality for all the Muslims. Say if there's however many millions of Muslims in America, that just America alone, that they're going to accommodate them going to Tunisia, to Saudi Arabia, to Indonesia, to whatever. That is not so practical. So for those who remain that, yes, they should be doing positive works for Islam and da'wah, okay? And da'wah requires knowledge. So that means not everyone's going to be necessarily out on the street giving da'wah, but da'wah requires knowledge as well. So getting back to the real estate development, that this can be something good. But one thing I would advise, and this is from experience and from looking at other scenarios that have taken place, especially in America, where we've had our elders and others who came before us who established communities. Most of those communities are kind of devastated now. They're non-existent because of the impracticality. A lot of times people tried to make Islamic enclaves in New York, in Alabama, in different places in America, in secluded, but usually by the next generation, there's nothing for the children. They're too far away from the rest of society. There's not many options, and they usually move out of those places. And then the community is just based on a few elders who then begin to die off. And this seems to be the case I can think of several scenarios that are well known here in the U.S., that we have our elders, especially in the African American community. We have those more than others, to a greater less extent, I think, just being from the indigenous peoples here. So with that being the case, those are things to consider. But ala kulli hal, this is khair. Make sure it's lawful. Another point I do want to mention, when you endeavor in these projects, this is good, but if you are those people who are community minded, who are like, yeah, we're going to make a community and we're all going to kind of make Hijra to a place in California or whatever, you also have to remember, who are you bringing into that community? Is it just people who have the money for that? And who are those people? How do you screen them? What happens if you bring in some suspicious people? They weren't suspicious initially, but you find out they're on a different aqidah than you are. And they are vigilant about, no, we're going to have a masjid and it's going to be an extreme Sufi. It's going to have takfiri elements. We are going to make plans here. So you have to know who's in your community. That's another thing that we've seen. We've witnessed this over years, over generations, problems that have happened with undesirable elements being moved into communities and coming into communities, as well as spies, as well as literally plants from the intelligence agencies such as the FBI and otherwise Homeland Security. Now, so all of those things need to be kind of considered and looked at and given weight, especially for those who are trying to make a community. Now, if your goal is just to make a housing development and let the people do their own thing, this is khair too. A lot of Muslims in a certain area, they can have a masjid, they can kind of have their own schools, and they can begin, to develop, a sense of community and a sense of goodness and charity and all the righteousness of Islam, and they can propagate that and establish a good moral community. This is possible. This is possible without having maybe it all being under someone or something like this. So those are all things to consider, and it depends on your goal. If it's just a business thing and you want to do this as a business development and also establishing community or something good, then la bas. This is khair. This is good. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala the Almighty to accept our good and forgive our evil, protect us from kulli su' wa makruh, bless us all with ikhlas, with thabat, ala sunnat nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. وصلى الله وسلم على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.